Hello! There is a general vibe that second-generation migrants are quite successful. Today, I'm looking at a paper that examines to what extent that is true, and if so, why? For context, most of the data came from full access to census records from 1976 to 2016 to compare first and second generation migrants from nearly every migrant community in Australia. One word I'm going to be using a lot is percentile. This is the income rank of an individual compared to their peers. For example, if someone is in the 30th percentile, what that means is that if you turned Australia into 100 people and ordered them from lowest to highest income, they would be person number 30. To begin, let's answer the first question. How actually mobile are second-generation migrants? On average, first-generation migrants end up at about the 49th income percentile versus their children who end up rising to about the 52nd percentile, a 3% raise. But this average hides massive variation. This graph shows the intergenerational mobility of every migrant community in Australia. The bottom is the income rank for the first generation, and the side is the income rank of the second generation. For example, Vietnamese immigrants in the 80s were in about the 28th income percentile, but their children rose 25 ranks to about the 53rd percentile, from the bottom third to above average. This solid black line shows the average intergenerational mobility of an Australian, and the dotted line shows the intergenerational mobility of an immigrant family. On average, migrant families had greater intergenerational mobilities by about 2 percentile points. For example, here we can see, on average, an Australian child born to parents in the 50th percentile would stay about where they are, whereas an immigrant family's children in the same position would end up in the 52nd percentile. But yes, as you can see, there is no average immigrant journey, with a massive diversity in starting points of immigrants and their future children's success. Here is perhaps an easier way to look at the data and break down the contributors to such high mobility. This thick blue line represents how many income percentiles children on average from a migrant group increase compared to their parents. This ranges from about 9% for those from Chinese Asia to about -1% for those children whose parents are from Northern Europe. This is the sum of three of the key theories as to why second-generation migrants do so much better than their parents. Firstly, that first-generation migrants are disadvantaged, whether that be to different language, culture, discrimination, or anything really. But second-generation immigrants do not have these disadvantages, so they propel ahead. This is represented by this green line. While a bit all over the place, generally looks like it has close to zero impact. Second, that second-generation students, on average, may have greater or lower returns to their education compared to Australians, represented by this pink line. This is generally negative, meaning that generally, migrants relative to their education level earn a bit less than expected, but the impact is not great with some exceptions. Finally, the idea that second-generation immigrants simply attain more education than their parents and other children with parents who receive similar levels of education. This final idea is represented by this bright blue line, can be clearly seen in almost every case as the biggest contributor to intergenerational mobility. You may notice that the worst performing countries are from wealthy English-speaking nations, like those from America, the UK, and Northern Europe. On average, second-generation migrants from these nations actually did worse than their parents. This is likely because their parents moved to Australia because there was a level of opportunity available that significantly outweighed the cost of moving and opportunities available in their own equally rich nation. As we can see here, this is reflected by the fact that most immigrants from such nations had higher than average wages. However, their children had no such special skills, and so all the advantages their parents had are unwinded, leading them to doing no better, if not worse, than their Australian peers. However, this is not the whole story. As we can see here, that Indian migrants, for example, also clearly moved for specific and successful opportunities, but their children actually did better than them, primarily through getting more education than even their peers. So, now we know that the main reason for such high intergenerational mobility is education. The question remains why some migrant groups pursue education to a greater extent than other migrant groups and Australians. Is it because of a specific culture that migrants are bringing to Australia, or is it the specific circumstances that different migrant groups find when they arrive? Researchers measured both. Culture they measured by looking at how much an immigrant's home nation outperformed PISA scores relative to a nation's GDP per capita. This is basically how well a nation performs in education despite various levels of wealth. Circumstances are measured by a nation's income penalty, which is basically how much less the first-generation immigrants earned compared to comparable Australian peers. This is meant to capture the difficulties of settling in Australia for the first generation. While neither culture nor circumstances fully explained why certain immigrant groups pursued more education, both played a role, with culture representing a significantly more impactful prediction. Additionally, they found that the size of the migrant community already existing in Australia had little to no impact. Anyways, thanks for listening.